there. Thanks to everyone tuning in, watching from online, and welcome to this virtual version of Stroom, which is an arts institution here in The Hague, in the Netherlands. My name is Lou Valad. I'm a curator here, and I've curated this program with all these really wonderful contributors, some of whom can be here today. And this is the 7th edition of the Uncertainty Seminars, so welcome. And even though we cannot welcome you here at Stroom today, we are very happy to welcome you from your own home. We're also very curious to see how you're watching this program from home. And so back in the day when we could welcome people to Stroom, we had these Uncertainty Seminar socks, smiley face, frowny face. And we are giving some of those away to whoever can share a picture of how they're watching this program and tag us on Instagram or Facebook online. Okay, there are some other moments for engagement from home today. First of all, the very first performance by Oddkin. We need your participation as an audience. So very shortly, Oddkin will tell you something about how you can help participate and vote online. And additionally, we are joined here today by Ilga Mignon, our online curator. I can see her here on my screen. We were struggling a little bit with the audio, but I think now everything's okay. There she is. Hi, Ilga.
Hey, hi everyone. It's wonderful to be able to partake through our screens, regardless of the absence right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So she'll be joining us and she'll be helping direct some of the questions that come in through the YouTube chat. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask some of the participants, I'll be in conversation with Anamaria Gomez Lopez as well as Meenakshi Thirukode. Please direct them into that YouTube chat and Ilga will make sure they come back to me. Okay. On to Uncertainty Seminars and the theme that we'll be working on today. Uncertainty Seminars are a series of events that we have run in this way since 2019, which investigates hesitation, doubt, and uncertainty as an artistic and cultural strategy. And when I was curating this program, I think time kind of caught up with us, so history kind of caught up with us in terms of making artistic programs around uncertainty. Because as a matter of fact, it seems like everything is uncertain now, and everyone in the world has lived through a year of tremendous uncertainty. And I thought most of all, our experience of time has almost fully come unhinged. The pandemic collapses notions of linear time, presenting us with different shapes as it goes along. Instead of weeks or months, we might start thinking in waves, the second wave, the third wave. We might be in the fourth wave already. We are often told to ensure not being back at square one, or tell ourselves that this situation will last for the time being. And the time being is this kind of being I've come back to. Who is she? And so Uncertainty Seminars Shaping Time proposes that artists can shape our conceptions of time, that they can challenge predominant notions of Western linear time, introducing other cosmologies, and maybe most of all, that art can propose alternatives that affect and shape the future. So we are joined by 8 artists, filmmakers, and composers who are making 5 wonderful contributions to today's events. Anamaria Gomez Lopez will show and discuss her work Cosmos and Paleontology, which connects traces from deep time to imagined utopias in the distant future. We will screen Denise Ferreira da Silva and Arjuna Neuman's Serpent Reign, asking how to reach the post-human past technology. Meenakshi Thirukode will discuss her practice instituting otherwise. And finally, we close the day with a video wall and performance by Joeri Woudstra and Robbie Barrat on the nostalgic aesthetics of our present. I'll get to the fast performance in a bit. Before that, always very important that we thank our funders. We are funded to do this program by the Gemeente Den Haag, the Council of The Hague, the Mondrian Fund, and Bank Giro Loterij. Thank you. Okay. On to Oddkin. Oddkin is a formation of Marton Kabay and Natela Lemonjava. Their critical storytelling practice shifts between investigative and metaphoric approaches. For uncertainty seminars, Oddkin have produced a game that deals with the accelerated abolition of mink farming in the Netherlands due to COVID-19. They propose that the obsolete spaces of farms are fertile grounds for a radically egalitarian and caring society. There we go. I leave the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Joe, for the introduction. Welcome to our scripted game performance. Before we immerse into a story of an imaginary mink farmer, we would like to invite you to join and participate in our interactive voting system. You will see the QR code as well as the link ahaslide.com/Post-Mink for the voting page that will automatically display the question with the 2 choices when it is time for voting. There will be 1 question in each chapter. If it is available, we advise you to vote from a secondary device, but you can also use another tab or window in your web browser. Please join and shape the course of the game with us.
There are 3.
The Dutch mink farming industry permanently ended by the end of 2020. Approximately 120 mink farms had to be closed down in a fast pace due to the incredible spread of the coronavirus infecting the minks, the workers, the owners. However, there are many mink farmers who left their business earlier, knowing that the mink industry will anyway reach its end by 2024. They have left behind abandoned mink farm building complexes as active and intensive ruins that remind us of the ethics we live by. Due to the spreading pandemic, mink farming industry turned into a state of emergency by Minister Schouten from the agriculture ministry with advice from the outbreak management team. For the Netherlands was the 3rd biggest mink farming nation in the world. The export of mink pelts generated more than 61 million euros in 2000 for the Dutch economy. 5 years before, the yield was even higher. Then they brought in more than 154 million euros. The mink farms are mainly located in the Gelderse Valley, East Brabant, and North Limburg. Now the exchange rate is about 16 to 20 euro per pelt. Bigger farms are freezing the pelts to wait for a higher price. At the end of 2020, all 2 million puppies and 400,000 mother minks were cast in various mobile carbon monoxide boxes. 2,500 jobs were suddenly lost, mainly Eastern European immigrant workers whose security is not considered in the 150 million euro worth of compensation package. The compensation is paid by the number of female minks farmers owned. An average mink farm has about 5,000 mother animals. The economic damage is significant. However, the psychological, ethical, social, environmental consequences are yet to be assessed. Now, these farmlands and its building facilities are not only the material witness of the past to analyze, but also active, intensive, fertile spaces for cultural imagination and economic speculation of what could come after. This is an unprecedented opportunity, a radical systemic rupture that opens up intensive spaces for collective becomings. These architectural abandoned wounds can in fact be spaces for healing from the collective trauma of the industrial animal exploitation that could allow us to rethink human-centric domination of nature. These ruins are the physical materialization of the memories of the capitalist culture that feeds on extraction. However, these former mink farm spaces can also become the way in which we can unlearn and reconnect with the needed care, solidarity, and compassion for all. What if these traumatic places become memorials, schools, sanctuaries for animals, humans, and the environment?
Mr. Horizon is a former mink farmer from North Brabant. He is one of the victims of not only the changing policies that put a ban on mink industry, but also the unexpected deadly spread of the coronavirus pandemic that accelerated the horrific and sudden end of his business. Mr. Horizon was not ready for it to end. He was still waiting for the best plan B to emerge in front of him. His farm was amongst the first ones where coronavirus was detected in minks. First the mother animals got sick, then the puppies. It spread like a cloud from one corner of the company to another. You saw the pumping movements of difficult breathing, declared Mr. Horizon. He, his wife, and few of his workers also tested positive after the outbreak management team enclosed his farm in 500 meters radius. I probably infected all the 7 people who helped during the mating season, as well as the animals, honestly confessed the farmer. It was a tough couple of weeks of heavy breathing, tiredness, and anxiety of not being able to stand for himself, for his family, and for his business that he inherited from his father. As the only son, he had never felt the urge to take over the parental business. When his father died of a heart attack at the age of 56, he promised his mother to help out for a year. However, as the love for the company grew, his father's sheds became less and less compliant, with increase of strict animal welfare requirements. Soon after, the virus was detected in other farms as well, when Minister Schouten announced the necessary measure of cooling all the minks. Mr. Horizon had a farm of about 12,000 mother minks who already had their puppies by then. All the animals, about 78,000, had to be cooled in a day. The hopeless mass killing remains in the muscle pain of his shoulders that gives him anxiety every day. As the farmer's emotions escalate. Newborn puppies couldn't even see yet. It cut my soul. I was involved with the animals, but they were also my sandwich.
In the first chapter, we are 2 days after Mr. Horizon receives a letter from the Agriculture Ministry about the planned budget that is allocated for him as a compensation for the loss of his mink farm business. Mr. Horizon goes through a mental breakdown. He has to confront the trauma that he went through, although he doesn't know yet how. It seems his life just ran aground. He's in a dire state of confusion and anxiety. He exchanged his life for his mink farm that makes him feel devastated, conquered, and angry. On top of his grief, he feels shame towards his family for not being able to provide what he used to, and feels bitterness towards the government, exposing him to such a vulnerable condition.
Mr. Horizon picks up the first chapter card.
I wake up in my sweat. A nightmare is haunting me. I run as fast as I can, but I'm not moving. I'm swallowed by the concrete floor beneath me. My shoulder hurts. It's not easy to get thousands of adult minks weighing 2 to 3 kilos out of their cage and drop them into the mobile carbon monoxide box. The smell of death is in my nostrils forever. And wherever I go, it comes with me. Perhaps it is my conscience. My hands shake when I go out to the backyard cage to feed my favorite mink that I rescued. He was in the front of the shed, and I always gave him some extra. And I never tamed him. But he doesn't bite. He's eating like there's no tomorrow. And meanwhile, my eyesight is getting shorter and shorter as I walk back inside the living room and lay down on the sofa to rest my nerves while I hear the mud dropping from my boots onto the floor.
Mr. Horizon draws 2 cards from the help deck and places them in front of him. Online audience, please prepare for voting. Natella to Valentino, go to website.
You are a guest in the house of Mr. Horizon. You notice his struggle, his stutter and his feet, his shaky hands and his cloudy eyes. You are considering helping Mr. Horizon by recommending a mental spiritual healer. Which mental spiritual direction would you like to recommend to Mr. Horizon? A psychologist or a Catholic priest? In case the result is equal, Mr. Horizon will flip a coin.
The audience has chosen the card psychologist.
I enter Miss Ursula's psychotherapy practice, which is located in a glass cube in her garden. And I sit in front of a big tree that bows to the strong wind outside while, meanwhile, remaining firm and steady. I hear the howling wind while I adjust the collar of my shirt. She gives me a glass of water while we engage in a conversation. I lie to her to cover the fears I have, however. My body can't lie. Under my pretense, I suddenly notice I am collapsing. She explains that she cannot help, but can show me ways how I can help myself. It's only me who can decide to trust my roots to survive this storm.
Mr. Horizon draws 1 card from the Destiny deck and places it in front of him. The Feather. Mr. Horizon, while he drives back home from the psychologist, decides to take a detour to his mink farm. He hasn't been around the farm since it was cleared out, and in fact, he has been avoiding it ever since. He goes inside the shed and walks along the empty cages. He notices a little bird nest inside one of the open cages. He stands still and looks in the eyes of the mother bird, while she feeds her chicks. He carefully takes off the cage door, walks back to his car, and decides to take back control.
In the second chapter, we witness Mr. Horizon's second nervous breakdown about his career as a mink farmer. He is still in the process of controlling his depression. He has yet to face an existential crisis. He lost what identified him as a mink farmer. Mr. Horizon has no plan B. However, his business would have finished anyway in 3 years. He's in a dire state of contemplation and procrastination to avoid dealing with the ruins of his farmland and to allow himself to envision what path he wishes to continue. He makes long walks around his property in the blue jumpsuit he wore when working with the minks. This worn and shabby jumpsuit is what is left of his identity. He sits down on the flat stone near the birch tree that was planted after his son was born.
Mr. Horizon picks up the second chapter card.
I am a mink farmer without minks. I'm a mink farmer without a mink farm industry. I'm a mink farmer with an empty farm shed. I'm a mink farmer without a plan B. I reach into my pocket to warm up my hand. The wind is getting stronger and colder. The leaves are falling from the birch tree. I reach too far, so a mink tooth in my pocket just bites my finger. I wash my hands to clear the wound. The tooth falls into the sink as I look into a cracked mirror for a moment. Then I dry my hands and put on my gloves. This pair of gloves are as old as my jumpsuit. They're like a second skin. I walk back to the office to close the barn. As I search for the keys, I notice my phone is ringing.
Mr. Horizon draws 2 cards from the help deck and places them in front of him. Online audience, please prepare for voting. Natella to Valentino, go to website.
In the neighborhood, everyone knows Mr. Horizon is out of business. The value of his business was dominant in the region, therefore his property is in great interest to some of his partners. What do you think, who calls Mr. Horizon? Someone from the municipality or a journalist from a local newspaper? In case the result is equal, Mr. Horizon may flip a coin.
The audience has chosen the card journalist.
I was a little child when I witnessed a young mink escaping from the barn. The mink was in bad shape, but managed to run away. When I looked inside the cage where the mink had escaped from, I saw a sick, mutilated adult mink body. I understood that there are minks who suffer and die, and there are those who suffer and those who break free.
Mr. Horizon draws 1 card from the Destiny deck and places it in front of him. The gloves. Mr. Horizon hangs up the phone with a smile on his face. After closing the office, he looks for his gloves, but he cannot find them. Slight panic runs through his chest that he has lost his iconic gloves, the remaining material witness of his identity. He goes inside the office again to look around, but he cannot find them. While he goes back to the barn, he sees a sharp, bright light from the evening sky. The next moment, one of the barns is in flames, burning violently. The pain in his chest intensifies as he goes closer. He takes off his jumpsuit and throws it in the fire. Mr. Horizon sheds his skin off like a snake to leave behind himself as a mink farmer.
In the 3rd chapter, Mr. Horizon wakes up in the local sanatorium. He was brought in by his neighbor who saw the fire right before the fire brigade arrived. Mr. Horizon sees his family around himself as he begins to remember what happened to him. The visitors have brought him food, flowers, and also his left hand glove. that burned on the side before they left due to the strict visiting measures. He picks up the glove, strokes along the bird edge, and looks out the window. The doctors tell him that he's probably going through a burnout, so they advise him to take a break from stressful encounters. Mr. Horizon sits up in his bed, puts on a gown, steps into a clean slippers, and goes out to search for coffee.
Mr. Horizon picks up the third chapter card.
Burnouts and burn-ins. I walk in a tight, semi-dark corridor, surrounded by marine paintings, mostly by Jan van Gooyen, as I read the label. I wonder if these paintings were selected especially to heal burnout patients. And I stop in front of one that is anything but calm, by Ludolf Backhuizen, titled Ships in Distress off a Rocky Coast. I can resonate with this one, however. My ship has sunk already. I drift in the vast ocean like a cork. I see my people drifting in groups, forming a kind of an island with their hands. The more survivors join, the bigger and stronger the circle is. I can't reach them. I try, but I cannot. I swim as hard as I can, but they float further and further. I press the button to call the elevator. While I wait, a cleaning lady passes by pushing a cleaning trolley with a big smile on her face. As she leaves, the elevator arrives, leaving a mesmerizing sureness in me, and I step into the elevator.
Mr. Horizon draws 2 cards from the help deck and places them in front of him. Online audience, please prepare for voting. Natella to Valentino, go to website.
Mr. Horizon goes inside the elevator and meets with a woman who works at the sanatorium. She invites him to join her. Where is Mr. Horizon being invited to? To the garden or to the kitchen? In case the result is equal, Mr. Horizon may flip a coin.
The audience has chosen the card, the garden.
I follow the woman who guides me out to a small community garden. She explains that this time of the year is when the sowing processes begin. There are huge grounds here that have to be sown, so I need some extra help, she says. As we're passing by the different sectors, I see other patients sowing. Some of them sow with big gestures. Some are squatting on the ground and placing seeds one by one. I explain to the woman that I'm a farmer, so I know these things. She responds with a big smile. We arrive at a big table, including a few bags of different seeds. She explains that these seeds will be vegetables and herbs that we use in our kitchen. I grab a handful of carrot seeds and walk to an empty sector. I squat down and I begin to place them one by one, not too close to each other. And while I'm sowing, I notice a caterpillar in a cocoon hanging from a tree trunk.
Mr. Horizon draws 1 card from the Destiny deck and places it in front of him. The scaffolding. Mr. Horizon travels back home by train, passing by hundreds of farmland in a place passes by hundreds of farmlands placed in geometric alignment. Mr. Horizon is confused about why exactly geometry is so pervasive in the landscape. He is thinking about how geometric domination upon the land makes us more isolated and leads to the hunger for more control. He looks at the electric overhead lines contrasting with the background of the whimsical clouds and the emergent shape of cooperation by the flock of birds. Mr. Horizon goes straight to his farm to see the ruins that remained. He climbs up to the top of the scaffolding that supports one of the remaining walls, where the demolition worker from Eastern Europe having his lunch break. Mr. Horizon gets up and sits next to him, while the worker gives him half of his sandwich.
In the 4th chapter, Mr. Horizon has a plan. He has never been so determined, purposeful, and excited. He realized that he is not a bounded individual needing to secure his interest for his own benefit, but he is indeed just a tiny part of a larger shared network of interdependency. Mr. Horizon feels blessed, motivated, and shines from radiating confidence. Mr. Horizon has just been reborn with the loving acceptance of his guilty past that he actively attempts to undo. He fires up the stove to heat up an old tea kettle. He looks at his wife, who is typing a message at the morning light. He walks to her and leaves a gentle kiss on her forehead. Mrs. Horizon puts down her smartphone to hug him as tight as she can. They begin to dance until the tea kettles start whistling. Mr. Horizon's rough hands go under Mrs. Horizon's blouse and gently grabs her skin, a reflex that he used to do with his minks.
Mr. Horizon picks up the 4th chapter card.
I sit outside the regional TV studio. I have a live interview at the evening show. The set is sleek and fresh. I'm a bit nervous as my hands are getting sweaty, but I'm more than content with what I'm about to say. I'm going to make an open call for proposals for new ideas on my farmland. I cause so much harm, so much suffering in my life to so many animals. It's not about the massive killing that I regret, but the constant fear. I have to change that. The farmer has died in me, but my body remembers. My hands skinned off tons of minks just to save my worthless human skin. And here I sit, waiting for my TV interview to tell you that I got a second chance to change all that. I want to turn my farmland into a space of care, and I urge all my fellow mink farmers to do so, no matter where we come from, what dirty things we might have committed. We need to turn the tide. We need to turn guilty spaces into spaces of care and love for humans, animals, and nature to save our earthly future. I go to the bathroom to wash my face before the show, and I look up, but the mirror is not there.
Mr. Horizon draws 2 cards from the help deck and places them in front of him. Online audience, please prepare for voting. Natala to Valentino, go to website.
Mr. Horizon receives hundreds of letters from all over the Netherlands, and he seems completely overwhelmed by the amount of positive responses and the quality of proposals. He selects his 2 favorite proposals, but eventually has to choose only one. Which proposal Mr. Horizon is going to choose? COVID-19 Mink Memorial and Animal Rights Museum, or a farm animal sanctuary with an eco-school? In case the result is equal, Mr. Horizon may flip a coin.
The audience has chosen the card: a farm, animal sanctuary, and eco school.
Dear Mr. Horizon, I'm Janos, a former pig slaughterhouse worker from North Brabant, originally from Hungary. I worked in an industrial farm and also in fur farms 20 years ago. And I'm writing to you because I recognize myself in you and I cherish your bravery to expose yourself, to show your vulnerability and your dedication for an ethical society. I know it's very hard if you did it for so long. I know. When the institutionalized massacre gets normalized, we reach a point of social schizophrenia. I, myself, I began to drink and got easily violent at home. So I had to leave my roommates until I met Larry, a goat, born blind. Larry was born in a goat factory farm. Nobody understood why he was running in circles. Some of my colleagues were torturing him, but somehow a never-have-seen compassion burst out of me. That was a moment when I decided to save him. I reached out for the Hope Farm Animal Sanctuary, the only one at the time. They not only saved Larry, but also me. That day, I decided to join the animal liberation movement. And since then, I'm a volunteer at Hope Farm Animal Sanctuary. Mr. Horizon, I wholeheartedly advise to establish a farm animal sanctuary in order to ensure that more Larry and more Janos can be saved, can be liberated from violence, torture, and banal normalcy. There are generations of families, humans and animals, living in factory farms that need to be liberated. Look into your heart, Mr. Horizon, and you will know this is the right path to take. I attach a photo of Larry.
Mr. Horizon draws one card from the Destiny deck and places it in front of him. The letter. Mr. Horizon squeezes a good portion of toothpaste on his electric toothbrush. He presses the button, but it doesn't react. He presses more, but no luck. He washes his teeth without the vibrating rotation. The proposal is printed on a silk 70-gram paper folded inside a pink envelope. Mr. Horizon wants to charm the municipality committee with the sensitive details. He drives to the office to deliver the application himself. He walks to the reception and sits down with his waiting number in his left hand. A woman in the waiting room sneezes so loud and so hysterically that the young man who sits next to Mr. Horizon spills his coffee right on his envelope. The eyes of Mr. Horizon fills with tears.
In the fifth, last chapter, Mr. Horizon receives a phone call in the middle of the night from his son Matthias from a small town in Colorado. Matthias tells his father that he got arrested and he immediately needs a great deal of money for his release. Mr. Horizon sighs and hangs up the phone. The full moon shines through the opaque linen curtain. Mr. Horizon, plagued by insomnia, and as he acknowledges the gravity of the situation. In the morning, Mr. Horizon leaves the house while passing by Mrs. Horizon's worried gaze. He drives to the cemetery for a celestial talk with the late Mr. Horizon. He quickly cleans the gravestone with the sleeve of his jacket. Pouring rain begins to fall. Mr. Horizon is writing a letter to the municipality that he wants to sell his property for them under the condition that he can continue his ambitious mission in the form of cooperative organization as a renter of the farmland.
Mr. Horizon picks up the 5th chapter card.
I'm sitting again in the municipality with a new envelope in my hands. I wish someone would spill hot coffee on it. I wonder why I chose a common white envelope this time. I'm thinking about the responsibility I have as a father. I let my son choose his own faith, his own path, to find out what he wishes to exchange his life with. I never got this chance from my father. There's no limit to ensure his freedom and to avoid the trauma of our outdated, punitive justice system. Unexpectedly, a real estate agent approaches me. He says that the value of my property on the housing market is 3 times more than the municipality can offer. He tells me that I could buy a house for my son in the United States. I begin to feel uncomfortable. He hands over to me a black brochure and a torn-out notebook page with his personal phone number. He winks before he leaves. I begin to recall his face. I met him at the farmer's market. Back then he was selling pig farm licenses. As I slide my fingers on the edge of the brochure to fold it, I cut myself.
Mr. Horizon draws 2 cards from the help desk and places them in front of him. Online audience, please prepare for voting. Natella to Valentino, go to website.
Mr. Horizon has to choose between 2 offers. Mrs. Horizon urges him to choose the higher bid to ensure safety in these uncertain times. Which offer Mr. Horizon will choose? The real estate agent or the municipality? In case the result is equal, Mr. Horizon may flip a coin.
The audience has chosen the card, municipality.
I call the real estate agents to say I don't care about his money. I tell him that I feel offended receiving and considering his offer. The municipality gave us the green light to begin a new phase, a new beginning of a collective, multi-species liberation in my farmland, a rebirth that we all wish for. I go to the backyard to give some food to my favorite mink, the only faithful witness of my past. I look into the cage and I see his mutilated body. Probably he went mad and began to bite himself. It often happens in distress. Dizziness clouds my eyes. The key of the mink cage falls out of my hands as a striking cramp swallows my chest. I wanted to set him free. My heart hardens as a black beeping sound enters my ears and I collapse on the ground. Everything fades.
Mr. Horizon draws 1 card from the destiny deck. and places it in front of him. The key. Mrs. Horizon finds Mr. Horizon on the ground. She looks at him with the trembling eyes. Her body suddenly starts to remember, her hands unwittingly clenched into a fist. She was there all along, without any sincere consideration by Mr. Horizon. Her heartbeat slows down. Picks up the key from the mink cage, from the ground. She turns the key in the dirty keyhole with the shaky hands. She struggles to open the cage. She reaches out to the mink corpse and carries it to the farmland. She digs a small hole by the ruin of the farm building. She places the cold, stiffened mink body inside Mr. Horizon's left burned glove as a final respect before she buries it. A flock of birds passes by above Mrs. Horizon as she walks back to the house.
Hi. Heavy ending there. I would like to applaud. I'm not going to because we're in a room pretty much by ourselves. We are joined already on Zoom by Anamaria Gomez Lopez and our online moderator Ilga, but first we'll be watching her film Cosmos and Paleontology. Anamaria Gomez Lopez is an interdisciplinary artist and researcher living in Amsterdam. Her practice is based on body-based and durational projects, anchored on archival research in history of the life sciences. We are going to be watching Cosmos and Paleontology, a 14-minute film, a visual essay on Soviet science fiction author and paleontologist Ivan Efremov.
Появились черные прогалины в звездных роях протяжением в миллионы километров. Жутко было представить себе огромные размеры этого облака пылевой материи, отражавшего свет дальних звезд. Иногда звезды сближаются и снова расходятся на миллиарды лет, точно корабли одной галактики. А в еще более огромном пространстве отдельные галактики также подобны еще большим кораблям, светящим друг другу своими огнями в неизмеримом океане тьмы и холода. В его закрытых глазах роились тысячи светил, плыли колоссальные звездные облака, черные завесы холодной материи, гигантские хлопья светящегося газа. И все это, простирающееся на биллионы и триллионы километров, рассеянное в чудовищной холодной пустоте, разделенное невообразимыми пространствами, беспросветный мрак. Будет действовать дальше, не боясь нового, как бы невероятно оно ни было. В 20 лет его мучила эта загадка полей смерти динозавров в Средней Азии. Миллионы особей самого различного возраста погребены в этих скоплениях. Кости тянулись грядой поперек всего котлована и, по-видимому, еще далеко за его пределами. Это остатки размытых когда-то кладбищ динозавров, кладбищ, которые превосходят всякое воображение по своим размерам.
Hi, Ilka, I can hear you. Anamaria, I can hear you. That's great news in this mediated by technology sort of conversation, yeah. Anamaria, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, and yourself? You've been doing great. It's been wonderful so far.
Great, yeah, it was really wonderful to see your film. I didn't have the privilege of watching as an online audience, but instead being in the space, looking on this really big screen.
Anamaria,
Yeah.
can you unmute yourself?
Oh, stop the YouTube stream, please.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you.
I had to switch from the main stage, which I consider the live stream, so everybody who can see this and hear us is joining us over YouTube. So I'm just going back and forth right now and watching the chat.
Exactly. So everyone watching, think of some questions for Anamaria to feed into this conversation. And I'll kick off with some questions first. So, Anamaria, Cosmos and Paleontology was made with support by the VAC Foundation in Moscow. Yes. And this video combines a lot of footage of craftsmen. We see Efremov's grave at very much near the beginning. We see model rockets, dinosaur skeletons, a lot of archival footage. Could you let us in a little bit on the research and the making process of this and what links all these elements together?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and I'm really glad to be able to share the film with you. The film is taking footage from sites that were meaningful to Efremov, be it in his lifetime or afterwards with his legacy. So the site where you mentioned his grave also is very close to a site that was his place of birth, that has the library that actually has his name, a small library in a town called Viritsa. And it is one of several sites that has either geological specimens or some of his science fiction writing, the manuscripts, original ones. And it's sort of the beginning to take us through a tour where the places where he worked, where he wrote. The Paleontological Institute in Moscow features prominently, but of course the Museum for Cosmonautics, which is a place that sort of has some of his legacy in terms of thinking of civilizations living in interstellar galaxies, interstellar time. That's part of what also you see. So it's really meant to be an assemblage of different moments, both of his work and his life.
Interesting, yeah. And what do you make of this this figure or this connection between his practice as a paleontologist and his teaching about this, and then these utopic fictions that he ends up writing and he ends up being quite well known for?
Yeah, well, you know, at the time, the connection between deep space and deep time really wasn't something as familiar as we have now. And he was, I think, probably among the first to connect it, to see that early Earth in our planet could resemble, you know, early life in another planet, or in fact, that some human paleontologists could one day travel through space and see the remnants of past life. And sort of that collapsing and the idea that, you know, our place in our time is in no way fixed, even when we look at it in a past or a future, is one of the probably the most interesting things about both his scientific work, but also his prose writing.
Yeah, and there's a real contradiction, I think, in how we look upon Efremov as a figure now, as this kind of figure who could conceive of a sense of time that existed beyond this human-centered, you know, like Earth perspective. But then in your film, we also hear an excerpt of his voice saying, I've written it down here, yeah, talking about nature's own memory. Traces left to be discovered by a creature of reason, one who could evoke and restore which had been forgotten. Yeah. So there he's really centering our role again. What do you make of that?
Well, I'll just say that's not his voice, actually. It is the voice. It is his words. All of the script is his words, but the actual narrator is called Hildo Boos. He's a Dutch, Russian Orthodox priest who knows the Efremov family. And so, but the words are very much his. And I took elements both from his science literature, his proper academic writing, and his fiction. And it's interesting that sometimes the things that you think are fiction are actually his academic writing and vice versa. And in this case, while it is fiction, it's actually a composite of one piece of fiction and an essay, in which it's very difficult to distinguish at what point one begins and one ends. So I'm very glad you isolated that moment in the film.
Yeah. So there's also sort of total collapse of like what the reality is, or what these two practices is in this person. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. And this work, of course, is part of a larger inquiry into taphonomy, the study of the decay and fossilization of biomatter.
Yes.
This is like a multi-annual research that you're undertaking. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about that and where Cosmos and Paleontology sits in that inquiry.
Yes. Well, you know, the word taphonomy itself was coined by Efremov, and even though it was something that he drew from other paleontologists, especially in Germany, we owe the word to him. And in a way, it marks an early part of his career. And Cosmos and Paleontology, both his text that's called that and the visual essay, is sort of a reflection of his legacy and his aftermath. But it's true that, what Yefremov does is put the idea that how we study death on Earth is very similar to how we might try to find out life outside of Earth. And sort of the connection between the biotic and the abiotic, life and death, sort of past and present, future. All these things are what he is seeing and breaking down in the fossil. And somehow taphonomy as a field does that in the present, because it's the word that's used by paleontologists, of course, archaeologists, but it's also used by forensic scientists and even astrobiologists. So it's actually a word that in and of itself embeds and nests a lot of different scales and a lot of different takes on both time and life itself.
And could you say a little bit about the other things that you were working on with regards to taphonomy?
Yes, I am working on a feature film, of which this film, Cosmos and Paleontology, and another short called On Taphonomy are a part of. Right now, I'm shooting in Russia at the Mineralogical Museum, a place where Yefremov began actually part of his professional academic career. But I'm also working in Texas, where an influence of Yefremov, Johannes Weigelt, was also part of the laying down the groundwork, quite literally, for what would become taphonomy. And both of these sites have the question of extractive resources, the effects of taking sort of minerals from Earth, at the same time allowing us to see the past, but also, of course, to permanently affect the surface in which it's extracted and the ecosystems around it, and sort of how the pursuit of the past and the extraction of a resource is, of course, linked to the overall life and death of our planet, is something that's very much part and parcel of this project, not to mention what that might mean elsewhere, outside, beyond our Earth.
Right, yeah, and that's what seems to me is so important about this kind of bringing taphonomy to the forefront of the kind of sciences or the scientific discourse today, is that sense that, the extracting of oil, is part of that cycle of life and death. But also, in a sense, it's using time in the wrong way, right? Mm-hmm. These fossilized bodies that build up over 10,000s of years that are then extracted and burnt up within seconds. Yeah. And I was wondering in what way you think the work Cosmos and Paleontology or the film can give us an insight in this kind of value of time or time as a resource with regards to life and death on the planet.
Yeah, it certainly poses the idea that if we're searching for life elsewhere, might mean that we are either thinking we have exhausted life here, which is an unfortunate position to be in, because so much of life as we know it is something that still has not been studied, sort of the pursuit of space colonialism, if you will, or elsewhere, has I think within it the idea of limitation back home. And what I would say is that Yefremov was imagining space exploration well before the ecological crisis as we know it, and also was thinking about, interstellar travel, meaning connection with other beings for the sake of having a sort of, in his mind, I think, very influenced by socialism, a very horizontal relationship with beings elsewhere, but quite literally an expansion of what would have been a transcendent form of the human. So not in the kind of, capitalist-driven private exploration of space or nation-state aerospace agencies.
New colonialism,
really kind of expansion.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Yeah, Ilja, are you picking up any chatter? How is the chat box?
The chat box is relatively easygoing. There was a lot of love coming for Oddkin before that I just want to pass on. And there's a very practical or short question to Anamaria right now, which is, where is the museum? And also this commenter, Vincent, our colleague, says beautiful translation of the Russian.
Well, thank you very much. The film, the Museum, the Paleontological Institute is in Moscow, as well as the Museum for Cosmonautics. But the small place, the library where you see the rocket model, is outside of St. Petersburg, where Yefremov was born, but also where he's buried. So close by to where he's buried. And very much thank you for the translation. I cannot take any credit for it because these are elements that were translated actually during Yefremov's lifetime, some of these things. And so thank you very much, though. I think the narration really helps to move the translation forward. I can also not take credit for that. Again.
In addition, I just want to say that the way that this, the way that you're speaking about the interspecies expansion that would be more horizontal. I just finished Octavia Butler's Lilith's Brood, which I can recommend to anybody who is thinking about interspecies connection in this way. It's a beautiful. I mean, it's almost as if this could have been inspiration for her.
Well, you know, I think it truly, Octavia Butler is in a league of her own, and it's so lovely to be showing cosmos and paleontology at the time when Perseverance is exploring Mars, and that the landing site was, in fact, the Octavia Butler landing site. And so thinking perhaps expansively of science fiction as the framework for helping us unpack what space travel looks like. Of course, you have Yefremov, but I would say Butler and many others actually are doing the kind of hinge work that I think could be much. It's lovely that NASA actually chose this as the landing site name, and hopefully there will be more science fiction and space exploration amongst all of us.
Yeah, that is stunning to me. Yeah, thank you, Anamaria.
Yeah, really stunning. Yeah, I maybe also had another small practical question to follow up from the question of where are these places, and that is your connection to the Yefremov family. Yes, who collaborated with you on this film.
Yes, it's very moving that, in fact, Alan Yefremov, the person who you see, the man who's at the beginning of the film, that is Yefremov's son. He still lives, and his granddaughter and his son-in-law, Alexander, have now a great-grandchild of Yefremov who is present in the film also in the artist studio that you see. Both of them are artists, and actually it's funny that the grandchild of Yefremov did a lot of the ceramic work in the museum, but that this was not something intended apparently generation-wise. It was just a matter of coincidence.
It was just you mean the ceramics that contained the dinosaurs? These kind of ceramic renderings? Yeah. The
ceramic mural that you see in the museum actually was made partially by the family-in-law of Yefremov, someone who then eventually married the granddaughter, but this was not known. And so this is why the studio, you see the same statues there.
Wow, that's another wonderful little cross connection.
Yes.
In that part of the legacy, I suppose, of Yefremov. Yeah.
The artistic.
One more question from the chat, Anamaria. Could you speak a little about the music choices and sound mixing? It was so striking.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. A lot of the music is actually from the soundtrack of the film adaptation of the Andromeda Nebula, which is probably Yefremov's best-known work. So it's actually sourced from the film. But there is, of course, Sofia Godina, who is a wonderful Russian composer, Soviet and Russian composer, who has done classical work, but also worked heavily on early synthesizers. And so those are the two main tracks of the work. There's also radio broadcasts of Yuri Gagarin in space towards the end, audio field recordings that I did at different sites. But thank you for that. I appreciate that compliment. I will give a shout out here to Sergio González Cuervo, who's the person who was the sound engineer who helped me with this work.
And to Yuri Gagarin, yeah.
Of course.
I just wanted to ask a question that connects this work on Yefremov and his knowledge on animal fossils, speculating on the future. Oh no, internet connection unstable. The worst thing during a Zoom presentation. Sorry. So the connection of cosmos and paleontology and this looking in deep time in order to see the future, to the last work we saw by Oddkin on this kind of moment of mass mink death that we've just experienced, you know, partially under the radar in the Netherlands. I was wondering if you could relate that moment of, you know, experiencing this sort of mass animal death to the work that Yefremov was doing on fossils.
Yes, definitely. No, he was, I mean, extinction and mass extinction and trying to interpret the fossil record based on that is something that in Yefremov's lifetime, but I think also for some of his predecessors, clearly was informed not just by the experience of overhunting or just the, let you say, the sort of inequality that we saw in animal consumption that, while not as acute as it was now, certainly had sort of the beginnings of the industrialization of farming as we know it. With Yefremov, though, and also with Weigelt, an early influence, as I mentioned before, both were veterans of different kind in war. Yefremov was in terms of like the Russian Civil War, and Weigelt was of World War I. And I think that experience of massive death was, I would dare say, a strong influence on both. And sort of the recorded death, you know, the fact that it was both photographically well documented, and sort of what that means is certainly part of what I'm trying to unpack.
The connection of their personal experience in war and with mass death to the studying of death in deep time and extinction.
Exactly, exactly. And I think the role of the camera very specifically alongside that as well.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay, I have so much more to say about taphonomy and sort of the notion of the body field there, maybe.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And that is one of them. You know, the fact that in German, but now kind of more broadly, the idea of a bone bed is sort of something that you can trace a history, and it's of course something that, while informed by paleontology, I think in German Leichenfelde, which is the term for bone bed, but also for mass grave or like corpses in a battlefield, certainly has some bleedovers that you know, don't necessarily explain everything that's happened in paleontology, but again, certainly influence it.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Well. Great.
Maybe my last question would be, Anamaria, how could we stay posted if we want to see more of your work and feature film you're working on right now?
That's very moving. I would say, well, I have a website that just came up very recently, AnamariaGomezLopez.info, but certainly the Vimeo page that's linked, thankfully, to Stroom, to the Hague artist website also. Yeah. Both of those would be the way to stay in touch.
Cool. Okay, thank you. I will definitely do that. And we'll post it again in our info spread on the website. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate this a lot.
Yeah. All right, Maria, sorry. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll be moving on to Serpent Reign, which is kind of really beautiful follow-up to your work here.
Yes, no, I'm in excellent company, so thank you for that. It's lovely.
Yeah, thank you for joining us here today. I hope to see you soon, and
enjoy Serpent Reign.
Yeah, keep us up to date on the taphonomy website and the feature film.
Thank you.
Be really interested. Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
I need to grab my notes. Bye. Hi, welcome back. New angle, same me. We're going to be watching Serpent Reign by Denise Ferreira da Silva and Arjuna Neuman. Dr. Denise Ferreira da Silva's academic writing and artistic practice address the ethical questions of the global present. Arjuna Neuman is an artist, filmmaker, and writer. Together, they've made Serpent Reign an experiment in working together as much as a film about the future. The video that speaks from inside the cut between slavery and resource extraction, between Black Lives Matter and the matter of life, between the state changes of elements, timelessness, and tarot. That's it.
He is referring slave labor back to a different moment in human history. In doing so, he makes it impossible to think of slave labor as having any participation, any relevance to the life of capital itself. It may have relevance to the pre-life of capital, its primitive accumulation, but not the life of capital.
Hi. Thanks for sticking with us and coming back. We are back now, and we're going to be watching the fourth contribution of today by Meenakshi Thirukode. I've been told to remind you that we have a sock competition. So do post a video of yourself watching a live stream, tag Stroom on Instagram or Facebook, and you could win some Ansanti Samana socks. Okay. Now gracefully onto Meenakshi. Meenakshi Thirukode is a writer, researcher, educator, and feminist killjoy based in Delhi, from where she'll be joining us today. Her areas of research include the role of culture and collectivity from the point of view of a queer femme subjectivity, located within the realm of transnomadic, transient network of individuals and institutions. Meenakshi Thirukode presents her long-term project, Instituting Otherwise. A dream, a vision, and an imaginary of a better art world, a labor of love shaped out of the experiences of those contributing, a manifestation of years attempting to navigate. She's going to be doing a 25-minute talk, after which I'll be in conversation with her and Ilga Mignon, who will be transmitting some of your questions from the live stream. And in terms of content and trigger warnings for this talk, there will be a mention of suicide as well as sexual assault. With that being said, Meenakshi, are you there? Hi, Meena.
Hey, hi, Noah. Hey.
Hi. Your
Hi.
Introduction is done. You're on screen.
Okay, great. Wonderful. So I can just get to it now? Is that good?
Yeah. And maybe
Okay,
to say, first of all, about this little anomaly in time where you are in Delhi, where it's 4.5 hours later. Thank you for joining us, especially because it's such a late Saturday night for you.
Yeah, why not? This is the best Saturday night I'm having. No, I'm excited. Thank you so much for this invitation. And, I'm sort of excited to also introduce a little bit about the way that I'm thinking through my work. And I'll just get straight into it, I guess. So I'm calling this idea that I'm exploring as a being together otherwise, and a call for radical refusals by taking pause and looking back in time. So essentially the way that I've kind of structured the talk is to have a bit of text and then some images, and I'll just go through the text at points where I would read through it so that you could follow. And then at other times, I'll just kind of use it to pin a couple of ideas that I'm thinking through that help frame what the ways in which I'm looking at the work that I've done before, how it sort of informs the work that I'm doing now, and the way it kind of pushes me forward. So I've been thinking about how a lot of what I read grounds my practice, but then I've been interested in the idea of shifting of grounds. And so functioning really from different variables, right? So not so much a vocabulary, but the idea of being together otherwise, or finding an otherwise, really looks at a kind of new feminism, so to speak, or if there is, some form of like newness in creating a language to think about a feminism that, where have I begun? Where has it taken me, right? And that kind of transformative potential is where I see art being located. And I'm still sort of grappling with this idea of artwork and art worlds. And that's something that I'm trying to move away from, because for me, the art world and the idea of an art practice is still very defined by the art market. And I'm speaking also from my political context, which is in India, and the Indian art market was very sort of pivotal to the way that a lot of contemporary practices and a lot of political contemporary practices or social justice practices have kind of burdened. So the market always functions with intentions and preconceived notions. And for me, I was really interested in positioning myself and my practice in what Trintamina sort of says, speaks to, which is in the impasses, the blind procedures, the happy accidents, the unwanted discoveries, the time wasted, the useless moves, the responses generated by one's wishes and known to self, but unforeseeable to performers and the viewers, of always knowing what was intended, even if it doesn't manifest, and how that's where potential lies. And so for me, it's always about finding this potential. So this is sort of how it functions for me. And from that point, I'm also kind of interested in the without. And this is actually a conversation that Peggy Phelan and Irit Rogov has. And they speak about the without, because I always think about my context again. I've obviously had the privilege of and access of, traveling, having education from, mostly Western institutions. But I've also had to deal with the precarity of an immigrant or having to have the right citizenship that would have access to institutions or resources. And I've always kind of functioned from the point of extraction, right? There's always me being present in a different political context, but the knowledge I produce is left behind and I have to leave. So there's always a without. But I started to look at the without from a different perspective, and I see it as the notion of being without as not one of being at loss or inhabiting a lack or of not having anything, but rather an active daily association in attempt to clear ground for something new to emerge. Again, this idea of how does this allow me to think differently rather than sitting within certain kinds of binaries. And most importantly, recently I've been reading and thinking through Nora Khan, who had initiated dark study, and she'd written this, amazing text. And I think about our vulnerable stories. So in sort of introducing you to my work, oftentimes, we have the presentation and we have a bunch of projects that you talk about that where you began and where you've come. But what I've started to do is really find the vulnerable stories that exist in these projects that often didn't show up within the project itself, because you saw artwork on walls, there was a curatorial note, there was the institution, but there were other stories around it that actually shifted my thinking or molded and shaped the way I think about the work I do and how I kind of came to this idea of the otherwise. So that's what I'm going to do and kind of run through a couple of stories. And one of it that's quite dominant in a lot of my work are friendships. I sort of think about friendships outside of this very art world networking vocabulary. And I think about the deep kind of friendships that are spaces where, that exist with far more complexity, right? It's not always friendships in that sort of solidarity kind of way, but also the fallouts, the fights you have, the things you learn, the things that you don't learn. And one of the first set of friendships that I actually made was with the South Asian Women's Creative Collective, which is an organization, a grassroots organizing that happened in New York City in the 90s, which were mostly women of South Asian origin who kind of came together, and they were artists and because there were, this was, like sharing of like pamphlets and leaflets and just sort of, old school organizing at grassroots levels, and then really creating a space of care, of feminist care, and a space of sort of showing your work and your thinking. And for me, what was really important was that I was quite lost in a new city, and I think the way in which finding, that politics situating the politics of, South Asian diaspora and me sort of coming in as first generation immigrant and really sort of finding strong women changed the course of how I think, because, they were very generous and very open. And it was kind of a different environment to the current kind of situation that I find myself in India, which I'll get to a little later. And I think I learned about care and friendships first from these women. And at that time I was working at a gallery, and these were one of the first shows that I had actually curated. I actually joined as a gallery manager, and then I just was told to become a curator, and that's my journey of becoming a curator. just to sort of, there's always this novelty about like, this is before all of the master's programs, right? And then I was like, yeah, I could do this. And the gallery focused on South Asian artists and was very particular about them being South Asian because it was still rooted in identitarian politics, right? And it worked for the market, because I'm talking about like before the 2008 crash, it was 2006 and 2007, so the Indian contemporary art market was pretty much a bull kind of market. And I invited artists, and I'll just quickly sort of go through a couple of images. I just invited them to be in this space and do whatever they wanted for about a month. And then I just did programming around it. So my intention was really to allow artists coming from different practices to just occupy this institutional space and develop a relationship with the gallery director, myself, and the three of the artists that were invited here on the lowest denominator, which was, your identity, your racial identity. And it was interesting because the one conversation that was most important that I take from this is that the director sort of said, all of you have to produce tangible objects. And that really changed a lot because you started to see, artists sort of use different material because they had to produce something tangible. But the only one who didn't really kind of go with that idea and who really felt he didn't really want to sort of produce something tangible because the gallery demanded it was actually Alexander Singh, who then just set up a studio and started working on a script and, just really didn't bother with the gallerist. And I think it created a lot of tension. What you see in the screen here with the red tape, he started to use different colored tapes. And the red tape was assigned to me. So I was sort of identified in this process as the red tape, and the red tape, kind of the rectangular space, was actually over the logo of the gallery, which really pissed the gallerist off. And then she just didn't produce the catalog, or she kind of created a lot of roadblocks for me, projects that happened, and the projects that you do in a gallery, because that's where the money was. And so for me, it was really just kind of holding an institutional job because of the financial precarity and precarity of citizenship. And then there was everything that happened on the side. But it's on the side that I kind of learned, a lot of other things that kind of influenced this idea of the otherwise. And part of reshaping an urban landscape like New York, while this was, a project that's really grown. Right now, Project for Empty Space is located in Newark. It works predominantly with artists of color. And my project partner now works with another curator, and they've kind of, really sort of scaled up the project. But at this point, when I was working on it, it was much more intimate and small. But what I learned from this project is this idea of letting go. Now, that's how I framed it, that I had to let go and leave, the United States, because I couldn't stay back, because I couldn't get a visa to stay on. So I let go of this project because the project was bigger than me. But then I started to realize that that's kind of how we place the institution ahead of ourselves. In a way, we kind of say it's for the institution, but actually, the institution sort of also drove me to, the institution meaning the state, and larger sort of concepts of citizenship and who gets to stay and leave. So it wasn't so much a letting go as much as a discarding, right? And so for me, I've been rethinking about why, what it means to start something elsewhere when you can't be a part of it anymore. And another thing that I actually worked on was a soap opera, because at one point before I left New York, I was like, well, I'm not really interested just in sort of speaking to creating this kind of like market-oriented, object-based work. And so I just decided, because I also have a background in film and theater, and I just, Bushwick was sort of like picking up a little bit. It wasn't yet completely gentrified as it is now. And I just made a soap opera with artists and writers and friends who lived around Bushwick and other parts of New York, and made the soap opera about a South Asian woman's journey through the New York art world. And it had everything from like evil gallerists. I mean, it was kind of like, as meta as it could be. It was like scripted, but there were performances that kind of took place in some of these artist studios. I created an urban game where you could kind of solve riddles and clues, and then you get to a space and watch a little bit of the soap opera that was edited. So it was a really interesting sort of way to work with people around me. And for me, this also kind of was a way of being together differently, where all of us occupied different kinds of intersections, of what it means to sort of be someone who's traversing a space that is from the get-go kind of alienating. And so that was that. I mean, a lot of people thought I was an actress from Bombay and Bushwick, which is great for me. So I lived like 1 year vicariously as an actress from Bombay, which is, I mean, that's great. I love that. So this was, shooting in some of from the studios and in studio spaces on the street. So it was kind of I think about fun as also an essential part of the work that I do. And there's no complete film. For me, the process of doing this was much more important. It was about the people I met, the conversations we had, the things we shot. So I have a lot of material from a particular time in Bushwick, of people who occupied that space, but there is no actual final thing, and I kind of am okay with that. I think it's maybe it'll take shape at some point, and it kind of leads me to the work that I do at the moment in India. So I had to leave the United States, as I said, because I couldn't really stay there. There was just no way that, it was just, there wasn't much of a choice. And so, again, it's about shifting grounds, about uncertainty, about doubt, and you don't know, you live there 8 years and you come back and you sort of have to start from nowhere or nothing. But then again, how is the without a potential? I kind of came straight into the art world here, thinking about my relationship to artists and cultural workers here. And it started to shift a lot. And the most dominant relationship I've had is actually a very antagonistic relationship. And I did participate in the Me Too movement, which happened in the art world as much as any of the other sort of industries in India. And the art world is mostly market-oriented here. We don't have a lot of grassroots organizing, and so it's mostly mega, a lot of money with a few people. So individuals are institutions here, which kind of can be a very damning thing. One of the projects that then came in the post-Me Too environment was a project I do in collaboration with an artist friend of mine, Arnika Altag. She's German, who's been living in Delhi for a while. And Pact of Silence, How to Break It is essentially about thinking about ways in which we could talk about safe spaces or brave spaces, which I'll come to in a bit, and using transformative and restorative practices and working particularly with students and art workers. So we've kind of done this work at universities and also recently with Conflictorium, which is an institution that's in Ahmedabad. And from this project, one of the things I really wanted to talk about was pause, which is something I referred to in my title as well. We were speaking to larger audiences, when we began these workshops. And most recently, it was a far more intimate setting. And I've kind of from, in the post-Me Too environment, I'm really interested in restorative and transformative practices. I really believe that, we need to create an environment where we don't discard, where there's no punitive measures or carceral measures, but how do we create an environment where the culture in itself changes? And part of this is the restorative circle, which kind of is a nod to indigenous practices that, have happened in Canada, in New Zealand, and the United States as well, to a large extent. But, it's about sitting in a circle and really speaking to our vulnerabilities, to pause, and they're really, really potent pauses, because you really have to go back and think back to another time. You have to think about the kind of narrative you will speak to, because it's your story. And the pause has been, important, I think, because it's sort of generated a different kind of narrative that isn't just about victimhood and survival, but about, what it means to kind of hold space together, and for each other. So I've been thinking about the pause in relation to accelerated moments as well. So this is actually a couple of spaces in which we've done Pact of Silence, where we've sort of created, for instance, a feminist syllabus where groups of us come together and kind of think about creating pedagogies that are rooted in different feminisms, or discussing women artists who've been erased or lost in history, and it kind of from pause, I wanted to talk about accelerated time a little bit, and I want to say that as a student of Ma, but I mean, I didn't get to entirely spend as much time as I would have liked, but I was at Post-Mink when, unfortunately, he had died by suicide, and there were certain things that changed a lot for me. I was in India and I'd gone to Goldsmiths on a scholarship, and then his death shifted the way that I think about what it means to care, a politics of care, which has sort of been co-opted a lot with this sort of neoliberal speak, art world speak, politics of care. And for me, care existed 1 year later, but it kind of made me write a text which I'll read parts of in a bit. But this was exactly 1 year to Mark's death when I found myself in this project called Assembly of Desire, which is organized by a collective called Desire Machine Collective. And we, moved to this island called Majuli. This is a mezi, which is sort of built by one of the artists. And there were a group of us, students, yoga teachers, just friends of the artists who kind of came together and spent time in this island on a river called the Brahmaputra, which is northeast of India. To get to Majuli is quite a journey. And a lot of things happened here. There wasn't a lot of kind of waking up, presenting, going to bed. It wasn't sort of like a symposium or a biennale. It was a different way of being together. And I'm just going to read a couple of things from a text that I wrote, which would kind of speak to the time that I spent there. So I call this the aesthetics of my politics. So I think about death and suicide. I spent the first anniversary of his death on the island, with a group of people with whom I laughed a lot and rode bikes with, and ended the night with one of them dedicating songs to each of us who sat around him in the womb of the mezi. A year ago, the suicide let out a kind of accelerated force that brought a mass group of his students together. We found ways of being together that the neoliberal university space, a space that's becoming corporatized and in many ways already is, tried to and tries to nip in the bud, so to speak. In our collective mourning and anger and sadness, friendships were strengthened in ways I can't ever articulate. We took care of each other, we cried, we fought, we cooked for each other, we laughed, we were in pain, but we were always together. At times we went into our caves, but when one of us did, the others watched over more closely. And despite us being together for just 12 months, being displaced and atomized by top management in what my late professor called the vampire's castle, we persist, we love, we stay in touch, we build. It's like we are all being guided by the ghosts and specters of a being who is called Mark. Ghosts. John Akenfra writes of ghosts. When we listen to neo-Nazis talk, make this country great again, it's like the cadaver of Andrew Jackson speaking to us. What ghosts will a post-capitalist desire call upon then? Portals, and so the aesthetics of my politics. What makes someone enter a conversation with us around the positions we take, the politics we live or try to live, without being able to easily dismiss us? My hyper-educated upper-class caste self is an aesthetic, or at least that's how I project the self-awareness I have around my privileges, and it makes unsuspecting individuals enter a conversation with me around my politics, because they can't quite figure out what I stand for, but the world works on assumptions. So a degree from Christie's and Goldsmiths is an enticing portal. enter through it expecting something, usually adding intellectual value or cultural capital to the machine. But maybe the portal can be used as a loophole instead. Time. Someone spoke of having more time with each other. I agree, except that time clearly walked for me throughout the assembly. Maybe it was the island, but in retrospect, I never said hello to the island. I wonder why. Maybe the island did say hello, though. A lot of us spoke of synchronicity as soon as we went back to our ways of being. Maybe that's the island telling us we didn't really leave, we carried a few ghosts with us. What was most crucial in setting the assembly in Majuli was that it's an island that's not easy to get to. In my travel to get to Majuli and in getting out of Majuli, many micro-conversations took place. And again, the accelerated friendships took form in that post-capitalist desire kind of way. They just sort of happened. We were tired at the 8th hour of a 10-hour journey on the bus from Nimani Ghat to Guwahati, and Julia walks over and sits next to me, and we have the most intense conversation, half tired, half asleep, and yet focused. But it was in that other state of being that we bonded. There was no presentation mode or the pretense of paying attention in a fully awake state of mind. I laughed at everything Sarag said, and I feel like it's all I needed to know he's one to keep, something that might not have happened if I just went from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. at his opening. I worked with Wahida on the riverbed, and all we came up with was that we needed to start a cosmetics company together called Brahmaputra Minerals and take some of what the riverbed offers back to us. I love how we went all capitalist desire, and we laughed about it. So that was just a little bit of my experience there, and it kind of comes to Mickey Scott Bay Jones and Pact of Silence with its pause, Majuli with accelerated time and friendships kind of speak to creating brave spaces and not safe spaces, because this idea that we will be brave together rather to know that we carry scars and cause wounds at the same time. So I've been interested in this idea of brave space, and that's sort of where the journey has taken me forward. And I think about this in scale. I went from curating a very mega project called Out of Turn, which is part of a larger festival, and the same year curated something in my apartment, which is sort of speaking to what Trintamina was saying. And I like how I function in a way in different scales. So people sort of thought, you've arrived, Meenakshi, because you're curating this really mega show at this art festival. But where I really arrived was when I was in my apartment working with artists that I love and care about and creating a different kind of economy. And I started to do more of that. So this is, again, a space in Delhi that was just next to a cafe, a storage space. And we did a couple of shows and conversations and a few readings and workshops in there. These are some images from that. And most recently, I was, when the lockdown happened, I just decided that I needed to kind of find a way of being together again. And that happened with doing a couple of Insta live sessions where I would just discuss a lot of these theories out of lived experience, whether it was Mark, whether it was Trintamina, whether it was Moten Hani, and it kind of, this is called School of Instituting otherwise, or School of IO, and we had writing workshops and study groups actually online as well, aside from the Insta Live. And so that kind of produced a certain kind of, community of the otherwise as well. And I'm going to end with the idea of desire. And I think about post-capitalist desire, and I'm not quite sure if I just imagined this or if it was said, but there was this idea of how to make post-capitalist desire as desirable as red lipstick or the new iPhone, because you can't really do away with technology. And so I've actually started something called Shop Otherwise, where I make lipsticks. So kind of a little obvious, but I think I sort of, after being online so much, I really went back, somehow just wanted to make things because the show that I curated in Out of Town in the Arts Festival also had a project that created a kind of queer space that was about, called Mutant Salon, which is by a group called Zina Sana, Young June and Marvin. And, we just sort of, put makeup on each other. We read zines. We talked about wearing bodies and makeup. And somehow I think it's what I wanted to do. In fact, a friend who is in this picture as well, I met at that point, and I said, let's just take pictures together and kind of be together. And I feel like this is my politics of care. I make lipsticks for people that I love and care about. And I'm starting to sort of work on other ways of building an anti-capitalist economy. So that's where I'm at. I hope I haven't, crossed the time limit, but yeah.
That's perfect, Meena. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Again, the moment that I would clap for you, would it not be just sort of me, the sound guy and the cameraman? Yeah. Could you switch your view back on so we can see the big version?
Should I do the stop share? Is that what you mean?
Can you ever quantify what productivity is when you're working? So I think your presentation just now gave a lot of sort of insights to the way that you seek to grapple with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, productivity has been, because I've always been someone who's just constantly doing, and then I have these conversations with myself where I just don't know how to necessarily stop. So I'm always in that tension of, am I producing because I feel like I need to produce to be, keep my practice relevant. But at the same time, I also know that I don't want to, kind of get sucked into that sort of, neoliberal idea of productivity and, visibility, especially on via online platforms, and yet so much of my work is actually on Instagram for some reason. Every time I post something and I'm saying something, it's actually part of my process of thinking, and I can't stop that. But I also know that it's part of my mental health is also leading to certain choices of because I'm kind of like a highly productive I function that way, and if I don't, it actually kind of affects me in a where I start to feel like I haven't done anything. And it's an interesting way to also think back of practice, because we're so into building canons. When we make our presentations, we want to talk about all the projects that we've done. And oftentimes I actually find myself in a place where I don't actually remember half of the things I've done. I don't remember a lot of the texts that I've written, but it's probably because I'm moving forward in a very different way. I'm just moving intuitively. I'm just improvising. And then when you live that kind of life, you don't always look back, to sort of quantify and use that or leverage that. So yeah.
And I think there was also a lot of richness, or at least things that I could really use in this radical refusal of taking pause, right? Like the pause that also this pandemic has given to a lot of us. And I think especially a lot of people whose work is based on being together, how there is a kind of emancipatory sort of opportunity in there. Such a rich talk. I also have these questions about the kind of sense of collective mourning.
Yes.
I maybe have two questions before I'd like to also hear from Ilga. Yeah, because, I mean, it's worth mentioning that also we know each other from that time at Goldsmiths and also being Mark Fisher's students together. So this quote, emancipatory politics must always destroy the appearance of a natural order, I think returns a lot for both of us.
Yes.
Must reveal what is presented as necessary and inevitable to be a mere contingency, just as it must make what was previously deemed to be impossible seem attainable. I think a lot of your practice points towards, or a lot of instituting otherwise, is exactly trying to gain access to these realities that we have yet to imagine somehow. Like you say, the post-capitalist desire. So I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit about the sort of strategies you use to point to people and say, what is holding you back from like imagining a better reality for yourself?
Yeah, I think, I've been reading because Scum Manifesto again recently, and I've been thinking about Valerie Solanas, and I've been thinking about the kind of, what a provocative text that is and what it meant for her at that point. And I've obviously been thinking a lot about the willful child and feminist killjoy as well, of course, with Sarah Ahmed. And I've come to all of these texts later on. So it's kind of interesting where, I might have had a certain kind of education, but none of what I've read actually informed. It was, informed what I'm doing now or informed how I could, function in that way. And I think somewhere, I just felt like the idea of feeling is very important for me. And I think it has to do with, for example, like some of the women that I met at Saucy, like, the South Asian Women's Creative Collective, and Jayashree Abhichandani, who is an artist and curator. And I think I've just been around certain kinds of women. The women were not accepted, the women are too loud, the women are too crass. And I feel like I've somehow just understood intuitively to sort of hold on to that as much as I am passing through, very sort of academic and institutional spaces. And I think I just found a vocabulary afterwards. I feel like I function via a lot of feminist snaps. So I do have difficult relationships with friends. I do have difficult relationships with people that I'm very close to. And I think it's important to speak to that. And, it's not just, we're all okay, 100% of the time. And I think I just acknowledge the complexity of things because complexity is not necessarily rewarded as much. And then, I've been reading, for example, with Solanas talking about, being criminal and not actually, thinking about reform. I mean, I feel like, that's quite a radical thought. It's a radical refusal to say that reform would work. Like, she's just like, no, you just have to burn shit down, and you just have to end it. You have to take the 6-inch blade to it, or, and it's just, I just find that really like, that's where I derive maybe like a way of being, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. From criminal existence and burning shit down, maybe a little bit to the, or I have a question that's maybe a little bit more on the controversial side, and I'm going to try and sort of formulate it as I go along. Because it was funny to hear you speak a little bit about being involved in Me Too in India, and hearing you say as well that, Me Too happened maybe around that same time, like 2017, in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein allegations, when, we've discussed before that it seems like the Netherlands, and specifically the Netherlands art world, has sort of been going through this since October, October 2020. And then what I found really compelling, kind of reflecting on that in your presentation, is it seems like a lot of institutions here are really trying to finally institutionalize safety measures in the form of safe space policies, codes of conduct, etc., make them felt within those institutions. But when I hear you speak about heightened uncertainty and shifting ground, it's exactly that refusal of a syllabus, right? Like that refusal of like institutionalization exactly to create a space of feminist care. Is there a contradiction in that? Could you... Or where do you stand on that? Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I was once told by a friend that, I said, well, in some ways, because I actually, did, I don't know if I should say all of these things, but I guess I might as well, because that's what this is about, like vulnerability. But, I did lose my job. It wasn't directly, but I knew that was why I lost, because of my involvement. I know that somehow a lot of people were changing their positions around Me Too, because right now it's almost like really cool to be part of like the Me Too movement. In 2018, like it was a different scenario. Also, I want to acknowledge that, in India there is, I'm upper caste, and so, it's sort of like, I need to acknowledge, Dalits and Baujan feminists who were also sort of been, whose work kind of gets erased and appropriated. So I want to acknowledge that they were, also involved, and it's not just how upper caste Savarna feminists always get kind of like the limelight sort of, and that's not, so the acknowledgement is important. But yeah, I mean, I've, had to lose my job, and there was always this sort of conversation of how it kind of changed now because there's so much going on internationally. Like, for example, with anonymous Instagram accounts, the Me Too in the art world in India was an anonymous account, and there was a defamation case, and anonymity was won, whatever winning means, but at that point there was a lot of hearsay, a lot of rumors, and a lot of assumptions of who's running that account, and some of us bore the brunt.
I'm sorry, but this is a carbon copy of what happened in the Netherlands, but like 2 years later. Yeah, crazy. Yeah. And going back to what my friend said, I said, I kind of miss curating something, and said, well, when you start to compromise, you'll have to compromise if you need to be part of an institutional space. And I said, isn't that bizarre after everything that I'm still told to compromise, when actually maybe you should hire me into it and I can burn you down. No, but and so for me, I'm just interested in these narratives, and I feel like without me intending it, I'm kind of like, my positionality in this is shifted from victimhood to like, oh my God, whistleblower, to like, are you the one who ran it? There's a celebration and a discarding, and I'm just thinking that I know what my privileges are. I know the kind of support system I'd have, and so there are certain choices I've made. Have I lost a lot? Yes, but yet I'm kind of like here, so I'd rather just take those risks. And I always believe that if you don't lose something, like really lose something, like for me it was mental health, it was financial, it was my family's mental health, I mean that's something, and maybe it does something, but I don't know if that can function in a kind of infrastructural, institutional way, if that makes sense. Thank you so much for letting us into that. I mean, like it's somehow just kind of staggering to hear, even. Ilha, what is going on in the chat? Is there any questions to direct to Meena?
It lands us back to the earlier question. I think, Meenakshi, many of us in the art world in the Netherlands can relate. That's maybe we're just taking these steps as we go and seeing if they can mutually exist, right? Are they contradictory institutionally or informally? Where do they work best? We kind of have that answer, even if looking at your stories alone. I think one of the comments here is from Jane. Everybody who's ever visited Stroom knows Jane. She's leaving us soon, but she's here in the chat and saying something that I also wanted to ask you a little bit more about is the idea of the brave space over than safe space. Can you tell a little bit about that and how maybe we can take maybe some takeaways, because a lot of people are struggling still, maybe in their art schools, other types of education, in either speaking truth to power or things that are not transparent yet. And I think that the safe space might need more encouragement in a different sense, where it might need this idea of braveness. Can you give us some takeaways maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I actually came to this when I was listening in on Adrienne Mary Brown and one of conversations that she was having, and she brought up the brave space, and it kind of opened up. Even she sort of speaks to that, and it opened up something for me because I think I really believe that we're capable of causing harm as much as we can be harmed. And I think when we start from that kind of self-accountability, then actual change can happen. We can't always function entirely from just survivor perpetrator binaries, right? And this is really important, and so the brave space actually speaks to those kinds of complexity, right? There is no possible safe space, because what does that even mean? We don't live in that kind of world anymore. And it kind of goes back to imagining the world you want, and it's sort of what Morton and Hani says. You have to create the world that you want in this world that you're living in now. It's not going to happen in an elsewhere. And so for me, that, I kind of tell myself that when I was a kid, I just wanted to change the world. I mean, it sounds like the most, that's just what I wanted to do. And I feel like it's still what I want to do at a very basic level, but it's changed in how I think about what that means. I see myself in many different feminist lineages, across different political contexts. And you come in, and how Adrienne also speaks to this, she says, we all have a purpose. Maybe some of us are here to unlearn things. Maybe some of us are here to build things. Maybe some of us are here to give up on something. And all of that is doing something in a larger context that we might not be able to see now, but it's doing something. And so rather than kind of like being stuck in that art world framing of like, this is a social justice project that does this and gets that, and this is the form it looks like, I think it's about just living your life. I mean, that's what feminisms are about. It's about lived experiences. And so the brave space is about saying, let's just be in this together. And if I, screw up or you do, there's still a space where we can say, hey, let's talk about it, rather than discarding someone or not giving a chance for forgiveness or apology or accountability, So I think, that's what brave space opens up for me, I think, yeah.
Thank you, Meenakshi. Thank you for that.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
I also have a team here. I had a last question, but it might be nice to turn it into somewhat of a hopeful announcement, because I think that thought of keeping with like the lived experience of feminism, and being a kid wanting to change the world is such a nice thought to end on. And that announcement is, of course, that Meenakshi will be hopefully, if everything goes right in the world, joining us as a reading resident physically here in The Hague at Stroom in September and October. So she'll be working in our library every day. I was going to ask what you are going to do, but you have half a year to prepare all of that. So maybe I'm just really hoping for you to bring over some of those, lipstick making workshops, reading and caring spaces, and making post-capitalist desires together. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've really been thinking about, even with Me Too, I think one of the most powerful sort of, infrastructures and networks that existed was something like a Whisper network, or a network of those of us who share knowledge and information. And I thought, well, if so many of us are actually fighting and speaking our truths, then, I'd love for all of us to come together, because that would just be amazing, and create like a brave space in The Hague.
We're going to go for it. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll bring lipsticks with me.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Meenakshi. I'm really looking forward. Yeah. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, same.
All
likewise.
Right.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye. Screen. Thank you and welcome back. We just have one last contribution today, and it's a performance by, well, it's a collaboration between two artists, one of whom is a Haagse kunstenaar, the Hague artist. So Joeri Woudstra is a multidisciplinary visual artist and composer based here in The Hague. And Robbie Barrat, who's an artist and graphic designer working with artificial intelligence as a tool and a medium. Robbie was in fact supposed to be here, but can't get out of Paris right now. Together, they're presenting Radiate, a performance made up of collage of images from a neural network created by mining hundreds of iPhone shots of sunsets. Hi, everyone. Thanks for still being with us. Thank you very much to Joeri for that amazing set. Great way to end this day, I think. I'd like to extend an enormous big thank you to everyone who's watched online. A recording of this day with a shortened version of the videos Cosmos and Paleontology and Serpent Reign will appear on Stroom's YouTube page very shortly. A next edition of Uncertainty Seminars is planned for the 2nd of October of this year, and we are very, very hopeful that we will be able to welcome you here at Stroom, sort of in the flesh, in the well-vaccinated flesh, instead of online. An incredible big thank you to our contributors today. I see Oddkin as well as Joeri standing over there, but of course also Meenakshi, Anamaria, Denise and Arjuna, who are watching from afar. A major thank you to Ilha Mignon, who not only was our moderator, but I'd also like to extend my thanks to Ratna Rumping and Ilha Mignon, who set up this series of Uncertainty Seminars in its current form back in 2019. A major thank you to the Stroom production team, Michelle, Johan, Marika, who have made this all possible, and all the incredible sort of tech that came with it. And a very special thank you to Stefan Bandelak, who has run the live broadcast for us and is downstairs in what he describes as the war room, directing every single camera and person to stand and go, you know, where they need to be at the right moment. Yeah, I think that's all the thank yous I have to extend. Again, major thank you for watching online. This has been very new for me and absolutely joyful. So I hope everyone has a really lovely, healthy evening. And we hope to see you soon again at Stroom.